What if I told you that a single wrong turn, a misplaced sandwich, and a series of fatal miscommunications dragged the entire world into 4 years of unimaginable slaughter? Welcome to History Unfolded. Today we are answering one of the most debated and consequential questions of the 20th century. Why did World War I actually start? This is not just a story about dates, treaties, or royal assassinations. It is a story about how decades of quiet rivalry, fragile diplomacy, and human miscalculation turned Europe into a loaded powder keg. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a regional crisis in the Balkans exploded into a global war. You will see why the common belief that one assassination caused the conflict is only half the truth, and you will understand why the world we live in today, especially the role of the United States on the global stage, was fundamentally shaped by the miscalculations of 1914. Stick with me, because the real story is far more complex and far more relevant than history class ever let on. To understand why World War I erupted in August 1914, we have to rewind to a continent that looked peaceful on the surface but was quietly fracturing underneath. By the early 1900s, Europe was dominated by 5 major powers: Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. The Ottoman Empire was in steep decline. Italy was newly unified but eager for prestige. Nearly every political and military leader in Europe shared the same dangerous assumption: if war came, it would be short, decisive, and fought by summer. They believed modern industry and railroads would make conflict swift. They were catastrophically wrong. Peace in Europe was an illusion. Behind the diplomatic handshakes and royal marriages, a toxic combination of 4 forces was slowly loading the fuse. Historians summarize it with the acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. None of these alone would have triggered a continental war. Together, they made it almost inevitable. First, militarism. Nations were not just preparing for war, they were romanticizing it. In Germany, the military held almost sacred status. The general staff operated with immense autonomy, and war planning was treated like a mathematical certainty rather than a political choice. Germany's Schlieffen plan assumed that any war with France and Russia could be won by a rapid Western strike before turning east. France responded with Plan 17, which emphasized aggressive offense and the recovery of lost territories. Britain and Germany locked themselves into a frantic naval arms race, building dreadnoughts that cost fortunes and heightened paranoia. Military timetables began to dictate foreign policy. Diplomats found themselves rushed by generals who insisted that delay meant defeat. When planning for war becomes more important than preventing it, the system becomes dangerously rigid. Second, alliances. Europe had split into 2 heavily armed blocs. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance, though Italy's loyalty was always questionable. Britain, France, and Russia countered with the Triple Entente. These were not casual friendships. They were binding mutual defense agreements with strict military coordination. The original intention was deterrence. The reality was entanglement. A local dispute between 2 nations could instantly drag in their allies, who in turn dragged in their allies. The alliance system removed the off-ramp. It transformed regional conflicts into continental emergencies. Leaders stopped thinking about how to de-escalate and started thinking about who would be forced to join if someone else did. Third, imperialism. The late 19th century saw a desperate scramble for overseas colonies, and it bred deep, lasting resentment. Germany unified late and felt it had been denied its fair share of global influence. Britain and France already controlled vast empires in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. German leaders wanted a place in the sun, which meant challenging British naval dominance and French territorial holdings. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911 nearly sparked war before 1914 even began. Every colonial dispute was treated as a test of national strength. Competition for resources, trade routes, and global prestige turned diplomacy into a zero-sum game. If one power gained, another felt it had lost. There was no room for compromise when national honor was on the line. And fourth, nationalism. This was not simply patriotism. It was the volatile belief that ethnic and cultural groups deserved political sovereignty, often at the expense of multi-ethnic empires. In the Balkans, South Slavs looked to Russia as their protector and dreamed of unifying under Serbian leadership. France still harbored deep resentment over the loss of Alsace-Lorraine to Germany in 1871, and every schoolchild was taught to reclaim it. Austria-Hungary was a sprawling empire of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, and more, all pulling in different directions. The empire survived only through constant negotiation and military threat. Nationalism did not unite Europe. It fractured it from the inside out. It made compromise feel like betrayal. So the powder keg was packed. All it needed was a spark. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo in Bosnia. Bosnia had been formally annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, a move that outraged Serbian nationalists who dreamed of a greater Serbia. Franz Ferdinand's visit was meant to demonstrate imperial control. Instead, it became a target. A group of young Bosnian Serb revolutionaries, trained and armed by a clandestine network linked to Serbian military intelligence, known as the Black Hand, were waiting along the motorcade route. Their goal was simple: eliminate the heir to trigger a crisis that would liberate South Slavs from Austrian rule. The attack began with a bomb. One assassin threw it at the Archduke's car. It bounced off the folded canvas roof and exploded beneath the following vehicle, injuring several officers and civilians. The Archduke's driver accelerated out of the city. The assassins scattered, believing the mission had failed. But fate, combined with poor communication, set the stage for tragedy. Later that afternoon, Franz Ferdinand decided to visit the injured in the hospital. No one updated the driver on the new route. The car took a wrong turn onto Franz Josef Street, a narrow road that led directly past a delicatessen where one of the conspirators, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, happened to be standing. The driver reversed. The gears ground. The car stalled. Princip stepped forward, raised his pistol, and fired twice. One bullet struck the Archduke in the neck. The other hit his wife, Sophie, in the abdomen. Within minutes, both were dead. One man. 2 bullets. A continent holding its breath. But here is the crucial point that modern historians emphasize. The assassination did not cause World War I. It triggered it. Without the underlying tensions of militarism, entangled alliances, imperial rivalry, and explosive nationalism, it would have been handled as a diplomatic incident. With those forces already in place, it became a countdown. What happened next is known as the July Crisis, and it remains one of the most studied examples of how quickly diplomacy can collapse under pressure. Austria-Hungary wanted to crush Serbia once and for all, but they feared Russian intervention. Serbia had powerful backing in St. Petersburg, and Austria's military was not confident it could win a two-front war. So Vienna went to Berlin. Kaiser Wilhelm II and his chancellor gave Austria a blank check of unconditional support. They believed Russia was not ready for war, that Britain would stay out of continental affairs, and that a swift localized conflict would restore Austrian prestige without escalating further. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. On July 23, Austria delivered an ultimatum to Serbia with demands so severe that accepting them would effectively end Serbian sovereignty. Serbia had 48 hours to respond. Belgrade accepted most points but rejected clauses that allowed Austrian officials to operate on Serbian soil and investigate the assassination. It was a reasonable compromise. Austria treated it as a rejection. On July 28, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The alliance machine immediately kicked into gear. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavic peoples and unwilling to watch another Balkan neighbor fall, ordered partial mobilization. Germany interpreted any Russian mobilization as an act of war. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia, but Germany's military doctrine, the Schlieffen plan, required a rapid strike against France before Russia could fully mobilize. So, on August 3rd, Germany declared war on France and launched an invasion through neutral Belgium, hoping to bypass French defenses and capture Paris within weeks. Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality since 1839 and had spent years trying to keep the continent stable. German troops crossing the Belgian border changed everything. London issued an ultimatum demanding German withdrawal. Germany ignored it. On August 4, 1914, Britain declared war. In just over 5 weeks, a regional assassination in the Balkans had triggered a cascade of declarations that engulfed Europe. Millions of men were mobilized. Trains rolled to the borders. The short, glorious war everyone expected vanished into trench warfare, artillery barrages, and industrialized slaughter. For decades afterward, people asked whether it was inevitable. Modern historians overwhelmingly say no. It was a tragedy of miscalculation. Leaders assumed their rivals would blink. They trusted rigid military timetables over flexible diplomacy. They ignored the human cost and the political reality that war changes societies forever. They fought with 19th-century tactics in a 20th-century industrial age, and an entire generation paid the price. And this is why the story still matters, especially to an American audience. World War I did not just redraw borders. It shattered centuries-old empires, birthed new nations across Europe and the Middle East, and fundamentally altered global power dynamics. It pulled the United States out of its long-standing policy of isolationism. When America entered the war in 1917, it did so as an industrial and financial powerhouse, transforming from a debtor nation into the world's leading creditor. The war established the precedent for American involvement in European security, laid the groundwork for institutions like the League of Nations, and created diplomatic frameworks that eventually evolved into the United Nations and modern NATO alliances. More importantly, World War I is a permanent warning about how alliance systems, rigid military planning, and the illusion of quick victory can trap nations in conflicts they never truly wanted. It shows how quickly escalation spirals when leaders stop communicating and start betting on strength. The parallels to modern geopolitics are not perfect, but the lessons are timeless. Diplomacy requires flexibility. Alliances require clear red lines, not blank checks. And national pride should never replace strategic patience. World War I did not start because of one assassin in Sarajevo. It started because decades of tension, imperial competition, military rigidity, and diplomatic failure left Europe with no safe way out. The fuse was long, but the explosion was entirely man-made. If this video helped you see history beyond the textbook summaries, hit the like button, subscribe to History Unfolded, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Next week, we are diving into how America moved from strict neutrality to the trenches in 1917, the political battles that shaped public opinion, and the decisions that changed the course of the war forever. Drop a comment below with your take.